It's time for another episode of Corner of the Galaxy from the Box, the show that gets you behind the scenes of the LA Galaxy and into the minds of soccer reporters and MLS experts. Your hosts for the day are Corner of the Galaxy's Josh Guesman and LA Times soccer reporter Kevin Baxter. Let's start the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Corner of the Galaxy from the Box on cornerofthegalaxy.com, coming to you on Monday, October 28th, still after the LA Galaxy's elimination from the MLS Cup playoffs by LAFC. So we're looking past that a little bit. If you want to go back and you want to relive some of that, go hang out with Eric and I from our Friday show. A lot of people listening to that. Hopefully that'll help you move on a little bit. And if you want to get more to what the Galaxy did in the 2019 season, we want to talk about some of the broad strokes things that may affect the LA Galaxy in the offseason, and still no real offseason news to sort of figure out yet, but we'll have that whenever it comes about. All right, in order to help me talk about the LA Galaxy, it's the panda himself, Mr. Kevin Baxter. Kev, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, did you say this thing is on video?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, you're not there. I mean,
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good, but where would it be?
On YouTube. We're on YouTube all the time.
YouTube. I'm waiting for this whole internet thing to blow over.
Yeah, you think it's about time for it to be done?
It's a fad.
It's a fad. It's going to go away. I know. Certainly. I think
it's not like the technology right here in my office. The technology I have a record player.
Yes.
A typewriter.
Right.
I mean, that's old school.
I was going to say a typewriter and a record player. That's
You kids get off my lawn.
Did you know records, by the way, vinyl itself is scheduled to outsell CDs this year, which probably doesn't surprise anybody, but maybe it does surprise you whenever somebody actually says it out loud. But CDs will be outsold by vinyl this year.
Back to the Future.
There we go. See, that's how it is. Patton Oswalt has a great sort of sketch on Back to the Future and pitching that story and how nobody ever questioned the fact that Marty McFly and Doc Brown were like best friends, even though their age difference. Like, how did they meet? And nobody knows, right? Do we really know?
General Patton. I like Patton Oswalt.
So anyway, that's what we got. Let's talk about the LA Galaxy here.
Let's do that.
Let's at least try. The LA Galaxy, it seems like, will have exit interviews next week. So not this week, Kevin. It seems like everybody's going to take this week off and then reconvene next week. So we should have more information from the LA Galaxy, a whole bunch of sound bites from guys as the exit interviews come about. Certainly the rumor mills have started to stir up a little bit, and that includes guys like Oriol Antuno. We've talked about Efrain Alvarez, Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Lots of people saying that, possibly he could go back to Napoli or at least back to Italy. I think there's some in Brazil that are trying to lure Zlatan down to Brazil as well. So lots of stuff. We'll get to talk a little bit about that here a little bit. But it's my main goal for today, Kevin, is to sort of go over and look at this LA Galaxy team. A team that, if you look on, in terms of points and in terms of paper and how it goes, is only about 3 points different than what they were in 2018. Now, in 2018, they missed the playoffs. In 2019, they make the playoffs, win a playoff game. In my mind, at least, Kevin, it feels like my eyes have told me that this 2019 team is better than the 2018 team. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you interrupted my interruption. I was going to ask you, why exit interviews next week? I mean, I think there's a contractual thing that players have to stay in market. I think they're supposed to train as well, but they're supposed to stay in market for a certain number of days. But I mean, the Galaxy have nothing coming up. Why can't guys like Antuna and Jonah go back to Mexico, or why can't Rolf go back to Europe? I don't understand why they need to stay, why the exit interviews have been put off that long. But to answer your question, yeah, it does feel like progress is made, perhaps slight progress. It's a starting point. I feel like a foundation was built. We know that GBS is going to remake this team. He and Dennis, they have a blueprint. Dennis has talked about a 2 to possibly 3 year plan to make this happen. And I think we saw the very, very beginning of it. I think it was hampered a little bit by Zlatan's presence because he doesn't play the kind of style that Guillermo wants to play. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But, it's interesting. You said that the record seems a little similar to last year. Certainly the number of goals given up very high again. But a couple of things, the 16 wins, that's the most wins Galaxy team has had since 2014, which was the last time they made MLS Cup. Now we're in the midst of the longest drought in Galaxy history. This is now 5 seasons since the team has played in an MLS Cup final. That's the longest they've ever gone. And when you talk about Dennis and Guillermo trying to rebuild things, look back at what happened, the last MLS Cup 5 years ago. That was Bruce's team. And you talk about Bruce as a coach, and you think about, that's how they won the MLS Cup. Bruce was also the general manager and the guy that did all the player acquisitions and all that stuff that's fallen to Chris Klein and Jovan and others. And I think you can really look at the huge difference in the quality of players that came into the system after Bruce left and what the Galaxy were trying to win with. And I think that's where Dennis and Guillermo are probably making their biggest difference. It seems like they've gotten much better at the kind of talent acquisition that the Klein group just was not able to ever nail down.
Yeah, I mean, the quality of players, certainly, I think you have to look at guys like, Uriel Antuna. You have to look at guys like Joe Corona, who came into this, Diego Polenta.
Pavone.
Yeah, Pavone. Why miss the most obvious one? But yes, for Pavone there. You look at that and you have to say that, the eye test, again, it sort of says that the Galaxy were a more talented team in 2019 than they were in 2018. They're playing in, I think, a more competitive Western Conference in 2019 than they were in 2018. So all those things, despite the fact it was just 3 points different, 51 points in 2019, 48 points in 2018, you have to say that the Galaxy advanced. They took a step forward. Was it a giant step forward, Kevin? I don't know if it was a giant step forward. And by the way, if you're tracking how many days it's been since the last MLS Cup, it was 1,786 days. Only because I have a countdown thing on my little thing here. The good news is that the Galaxy's last playoff game, which we were tracking, and I think was about 300 or 400 days different than their last MLS Cup game, is now the last playoff game was played just 4 days ago. Whenever you count this, the little countdown tracker. So the Galaxy reset that tracker there, and now can sort of look forward. Sort of the way this team was built, though, Kevin, was, I don't know, I don't think it's a little different. It feels a little different than some of these other teams. We talked about it while it was happening, but, obviously, South American players, a heavy contingent of South American players brought in by Dennis DeClosa, a heavy contingent of international players. The Galaxy finished the season, I think, with 10 or 11 international players. One of them was sent down to LA Galaxy 2 to eventually be 10, so the Galaxy are out there searching. If they bring everybody back exactly the same, which we don't expect them to, they'd be out there searching for 2 or 3 international slots again, to be able to put everything here on, in 2019, or excuse me, in 2020, put it back the same way. And so they are relying heavily on international players, and that's going to be, I think, one of my big keys for this offseason is how did the Galaxy infuse some of the domestic talent in MLS? And it's not a matter of domestic versus international, it's a matter of the league allocating a certain number of international players within the league. So each team gets 8 players, which means that the number of international players will increase by 16 this next year as 2 more teams come in, Nashville and Miami. They'll come in, but basically the ratio should stay the same in terms of domestic to international players. So the league mandates a certain number of international or domestic players basically have to be on rosters because they limit the number of international players. So having said all that, do Dennis and Guillermo possess the ability to scout within the league, not just outside of the league? I think outside of the league, they're well positioned for me. I think Dennis has a bunch of contacts, and he talks about it. Contacts in Europe, contacts in Mexico, in South America, and Central America. I mean, he's well placed to bring in the international talent. For me, my biggest question mark circles around the domestic talent and how important that would be to this LA Galaxy team in 2020.
Well, I think the international game, though, is really where things are. And if you look at the Galaxy, you talk about the number of South American players, and that is a big change. And I talk about that blueprint that Dennis and Guillermo have. Last year, the Galaxy did not have a South American. I do not count Rolf Feltscher as South American.
Who was born in Switzerland? Who was born in Switzerland, right? Isn't that where?
Yeah. I don't count him as a South American, although he does play for Venezuela. But that's where the league is going. And MLS is changing, and it's changing quickly. If you look at the Final Four this year, the 2 conference finals, all expansion teams. The oldest team is Toronto, and they came in the league in 2007. Then you have Seattle, 2009. Atlanta's 3 years old. LAFC is 2 years old. It used to be that the playoffs were dominated by the legacy teams, by the Galaxies and DC United and Red Bulls, and now that's not the case anymore. And the league is changing. And then if you look at the motors driving these new teams. In Atlanta, what do you have? You have Pity Martinez, you have Josef Martinez, you have Lodero in Seattle, you have Rossi and Tuesta and a lot of the South American Segura playing for LAFC. So in a sense, the Galaxy getting into the Latin American market, especially the South American market, it's important, and that's where the league is going. They just got a late start on it, but do they have to get better at scouting the league? Yeah, but the great thing is Guillermo and Dennis, they're products of the league. They started in the league at an important part in their career. They went away. They came back to understand the structure. Yeah, the league has changed a little bit, but I don't think that is as big an issue. I don't think getting attuned to what's going on in the league and scouting the league is as important as the context that they bring outside the league, because that's where the league is going.
Yeah, well, of course it's going that way, but there's a finite amount of international players you can bring in. So the Galaxy going above and beyond is really counting on other teams not using their full allocation of international players, right? Because they have to go get players from somewhere else, or they have to go get those slots from somebody else. If everybody used all 8 of their international players, the Galaxy would not be able to dress, 10 international players. And that's sort of where this comes in terms of making the complete team. If you look, and listen, people were just tracking it. They just showed the MLS Best 11, which came out and was voted on by somebody. You didn't vote, did you?
I was asked to vote on that stuff, and I didn't want to because you have to vote on the full slate of awards. I mean, I knew who I wanted for MVP and Coach of the Year and some of those awards, but Newcomer of the Year, I knew who I wanted. But when you get like Best Defender of the Year and some of those, I didn't want to vote not really being educated. I didn't want to vote and potentially cost somebody an award, because there are so few people that vote that, in this case, it's not the Electoral College. One vote really can make a difference. So to answer, that was a long way of answering your question. No, I didn't vote on that.
Well, anyway, Zlatan Ibrahimovic got named to the Best 11, and that's how it is. But they've been tracking basically the number of domestic players on the MLS Best 11, and now for 3 years in a row, the total number of domestic players has been 3. So you're absolutely right about the trend that is going on in Major League Soccer and has for a little while. And I think it's really interesting that it used to be if you were an expansion team, we knew you were going to struggle in the league, right? You knew the first couple of years you were probably going to struggle, and that you were going to have to get your feet underneath you. And for some, that's true, and I think you could look at that and sort of say that their introduction to the league, somebody like Minnesota or an FC Cincinnati, didn't use probably the available money that they had and the advantage that comes with the allocation money and not having any bad or poor contracts to their advantage, and they struggled through that, and they're not going to get some of that immediate success. You look at the expansion teams like Atlanta and LAFC that have come in and been like, oh no, we realize that if we do things correctly that we can be competitive very quickly, and again, pulling from the large pool of players from outside of the league can really make you a contender very quickly.
And I think Miami is going to definitely do that. I expect Miami to be very good right out of the box.
And Nashville sort of feels like maybe they're a Cincinnati or maybe they're a Minnesota. Now Minnesota has got its feet underneath it finally. And there's different circumstances in all this. I'm not trying to put just a blanket over all of these. But bottom line is the expansion teams, if you do it correctly, gain an advantage from coming into the league. I think we've seen it now over the past couple of years with Atlanta, with LAFC, just in terms of if you do it correctly, you will be competitive immediately. And not just immediately, but you may have, not just competitive, you may have an advantage over people as well. I was talking, I saw some fans talking about this well before the season sort of wrapped up, and they were saying, with the new system, remember, Kevin, they used to have to do a whole bunch of expansion draft stuff, right? You would pick like 10 players, like 11 players would be picked for a team that was coming into Major League Soccer, and that would basically mean that you're pulling players from within the league to these other teams. And now, you get, I think, 5 players each, and then a whole bunch of allocation money to go out and buy what you need. And so it's a way different sort of feel, especially now that we're going into 25 and 26 teams. It's a way different feel than what it was back in the day. And so the legacy teams now have sort of that burden of making sure that they don't have bad contracts. Teams like the LA Galaxy having to go through 2 years of drought of not really signing maybe the correct personnel or not having a team team in place to guide them through that. And that's going to put them at a huge disadvantage to the teams that are coming into this league. You talk about Miami. Miami seems like they're a contender. And they haven't. I don't think they have a coach yet. So it's one of those where it's like you sit there and say, with the right means, you can develop a team. And that's what the Galaxy now have to adjust and look for. It's not just the fact that, the Galaxy haven't been back to MLS Cup since 2014. It's the longest gap, Kevin. The bottom line is the league has gotten so much more competitive with so many more teams and a bunch of people competing for basically the same airspace whenever you think about it, that it has to be a well thought out and intricately planned team now. And you can't just have mistakes. One of the mistakes that the Galaxy probably had this year was having somebody like Juninho on the roster. Now everybody loves Juninho. He's great. But that dude didn't play. That dude didn't play at all. And so that's a roster spot. That's money that's being used up and not being and is worth nothing. Basically for the entire year. So these are the types of things you have to minimize, and that's where I think the charge for Dennis DeClosa and Guillermo Barros-Schelotto are going to come for 2020.
Well, and you want some more challenges?
Yeah.
Things have been advanced a little bit, accelerated, I guess is a better term, with some of the off-season stuff. It's going to happen much earlier this year, expansion draft and having to tender contracts and all that. All that is going to happen under the current collective bargaining agreement. That expires on January 31st. That means the teams are going to go into next season in February, which starts in February, if it starts on time, and there seems to be a building consensus that it may not start on time. But I think the new CBA is going to have a lot of changes in it. For one thing, the union does not like the idea of TAM money. They like the money. They just don't like all the rules that come with it. You have a situation where TAM money can only be used in certain situations. So, the best example I can come up with is something that has plagued Steven Betasor, the LAFC defender, for years now. He's had to move teams every 2 seasons when his contract runs out because he's deserving of a raise, but the teams don't see him as being a TAM player. So he's stuck at about $235, $240 for his salary. Other players are getting twice as much because they come in as TAM players. So the union says, look, if there's going to be a pool of money, label it whatever you want, but it's still money that we can use to sign players. Everybody should be able to compete for that money. And the union is going to push really hard for that. They're going to push for free agency, and they're going to push for charter flights. Those are the three things they're really looking at. And if the TAM money, both targeted and general allocation money, if that goes away, that's going to change the way rosters are constructed. For some teams, it's going to be much better. For others, it may be worse, but it's going to change the thinking. So you have a lot of teams, the Galaxy included, going into this offseason, needing to make a lot of moves and really not knowing what kind of mechanisms are going to have to do that.
Yeah, it's one of the things I talked to Dennis about it whenever he came on the show. I said, does that hurt you? He goes, yeah, it does. He goes, but really we have to plan like, none of that stuff is going to affect us because you can't sit around, Kevin. You can't sit around and do nothing because you have stuff to do. We know that the Galaxy will have to offer contracts to people and they'll have to pull options away from people. And that's going to happen here. Basically it all has to be done, I think, the day or two after MLS Cup. So all that stuff has to happen before, up to that date. So these decisions are being made right now. We talk about the Galaxy, sort of being in an off time right now. And bottom line is Dennis DeClosa and probably Guillermo Barros-Schelotto are in an office making these decisions. And granted, they probably already made some of these decisions, Kevin. They probably already have some of this figured out. But to understand the long-term ramifications of these, they have no idea because they don't know what mechanisms there'll be to re-sign some of these guys. They don't know, how they're going to be what the salary cap is even going to be. So trying to negotiate all these, and I wouldn't be surprised if players' agents are saying, we're not negotiating right now. We're waiting till the CBA gets finished because that probably means more money. You have to imagine that the salary cap is going to be raised. I think they might have some success in getting rid of TAM. I think that teams are looking for more flexibility. I think that owners might want to allow their general managers more flexibility because TAM is too subjective. Major League Soccer gets a determination on whether or not a player is worthy of, the targeted allocation money rulings. And as we saw with, who was it? It was Onstad, the goalkeeper. He wanted a raise. He couldn't get a raise because MLS said, well, you're not worth TAM, so we're not going to let you get TAM. But he's like, here I am. I played all this. People want to pay me this. Teams want to pay me this amount of money, but the league is determined that I'm not worth that. And so I think that, the more we advance past or deeper into single entity, you're starting to see teams butt heads with each other. You see owners butt heads with each other in terms of where they want this league to go and how they want to grow it. And I think for Dennis DeClosa and Guillermo Barros-Schelotto, where if you look at the roster and you see some of the players that could or could not be on this roster next year, there's a sizable chunk that you could make a good argument with of players not coming back.
Well, and let's just, I think this mostly hurts domestic players, and you can come up with any examples you want, but let's just assume for the sake of argument that Daniel Steres and Giancarlo Gonzalez are of equal value to the Galaxy. Steres had a great season. Giancarlo is a World Cup center back. Who's going to get the TAM money? Who's going to get the bigger contract? Even though we've decided that they're roughly of equal value. Steres is the one that's going to wind up with the short end of the stick every time, and the Galaxy, the MLS salary structure is set up to reward Giancarlo Gonzalez over Daniel Steres.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and that's sort of where you have to see it. Now, just in case we're talking about him, Dan Steres seems like he's out of contract. I wouldn't be surprised if he's in negotiations right now. And if I'm Dan Steres, I'm putting a big number up there, saying you owe me this money. I have been underpaid for X number of time. I mean, another guy like that is going to be like a Dave Romney. Dave Romney now has come in and saved this team, quote unquote, saved this team. And
again, third year in a row. Started
down the stretch whenever everybody's like, oh no, he's not good enough. He's not good enough. And then starts every game in the most important section of these teams. I mean, if you're Dave Romney, how are you not sitting out there saying, I deserve a raise? I deserve the money. And by the way, I deserve a starting spot. Whenever you do this, and you can say yes or you can say no. I mean, look at the case of Dan Steres and Dave Romney. Look at them collectively. Look at them separately. However you want to do it. Dan Steres was going to be replaced by Pipo Gonzalez as soon as Pipo Gonzalez got on the field. Remember, Kev? We were talking about that. We're like, the reason they went out and got Pipo is to replace Dan Steres. We all knew it. And Dan Steres went out and played so well. Should have, possibly could have been a Defender of the Year if it wouldn't have been for Jonathan Dos Santos, who should have been Defender of the Year. But played so well that Guillermo couldn't take him off the field. Played a bunch of games. I think he ended up playing 30 games this season. So if you're Dan Steres, how are you not asking for more money? And if the amount of TAM that's out there is just no longer issued as TAM, Kevin, right? It isn't called TAM. It's just money available to players. Then Dan Steres should get a chunk of that. I'm not saying he gets $1 million. But if you could say that you could pay Dan Steres another, $75,000, $100,000, is that worth it? Where before you might have a restriction on that amount of money because TAM has to be used for a specific thing, and the league gets to say whether or not you get to use it for that.
And I think it winds up because you have to use it in certain ways. I think some players like Jermaine Jones or even Jelle Van Damme seems to me, and Shelvik this year seems to me like they got overpaid because the TAM regulations said you have to come in over this salary and you can use so much money. And it just seems like those people got overpaid. The teams were throwing money at some players because of the TAM or allocation money guidelines, where other players like a Romney and a Steres, the nickels were getting squeezed for them because they had to fit under the salary cap without any allocation money.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, and then you go back to, you talked about Dan, you go back to Dave Romney. Dan Steres, I think, proved throughout this stretch that he deserves to be on the field a bunch for the LA Galaxy. Dave Romney probably has that same argument. I don't know how you can sit there and say, oh, Dave Romney didn't deserve to be. How many defenders were on this team, Kevin? A bunch of defenders were on this team, and who ended up starting those last games? Dave Romney did. Do you think Dave Romney did enough to be coming back with the LA Galaxy? Because I feel like there would be other teams that want him.
I think he did, but I think for whatever reason, and I'm not sure what the reason was, but Guillermo never really seemed to take a liking to him. I don't know whether it was a personal thing where he didn't like the way he played. It seemed to me that Dan did everything he wanted, and even when he put him on outside back, which is not Dan's favorite position.
Dave, don't get Dave and Dan.
Excuse me, I get them confused sometimes.
It's okay.
Not Dave's favorite position, but he played pretty well, being a winger. And that's not what he does. So I think he did, as he did the last 2 years, he did everything he was asked. At some point during the year, he played all four positions. He didn't complain a lot that I heard of. So I do think that he deserves a chance to come back, but I don't think he will, because I just think that for whatever reason, he was in Guillermo's doghouse and he's never gotten out. And he's made it very clear the last couple of years that he wants a chance to go into the start of a season with a starting job, and if he loses it, he loses it. But he's never had that to lose.
Yeah.
And so I think he would benefit from going somewhere else, and I think the team probably would be willing to give him that opportunity.
Well, speaking of broad strokes, let's go over more of this roster. I mean, I think you and I both expect Jonathan Dos Santos to be back, and by all accounts, Jonathan Dos Santos has like a 20-year contract with the LA Galaxy because every time
it keeps expanding.
It keeps expanding. I think the last time we had actually heard about him and his contract, he said he had like another 3 years left.
And no one in the front office knew that, which was either they're lying or they're ignorant, and either one is not a good answer.
So anyway, Jonathan Dos Santos is back. Of the other two designated players, though, I think there's big questions. We can talk about Zlatan here in a second, but Roman Alessandrini is probably maybe even a bigger question mark than I think Zlatan Ibrahimovic. I've said forever Zlatan right now, or I haven't said forever, I said recently that Zlatan feels like 50-50 to me. It could go either way, and we can discuss whether or not we really think he's coming back or not. But with Roman Alessandrini, I think it's more a question of, do you think he can stay healthy? Because if he can stay healthy, Roman Alessandrini could be a huge asset to this LA Galaxy team. You saw, little slivers of what he was able to do in limited time coming back off the bench in the playoffs. So, is that somebody you see with the LA Galaxy next year?
Well, conversely, when you look at Romney, Alessandrini is the other side of that coin. Guillermo really seems to like him, even though he didn't get to use him that much. I think he likes the versatility, he likes the attacking nature, he likes what he does. He's always on the front going forward. Doesn't track back much on defense, which might be a problem. But I think Guillermo would like to keep him for depth, if for no other reason, because the way that he's going to wind up playing, I think he needs a lot of midfielders. I think he would like to keep him, but not as a DP.
Right.
And that may work out because Alessandrini really doesn't have any other place to go. He likes LA. He's talked about how much he likes being here. He likes being with the Galaxy. His contract, I believe, was 1.9, somewhere around 1.9, which is not a huge contract, but I don't think the Galaxy are going to give him that much to come back, and they're certainly not going to give him a DP slot. So how motivated is he to come back? Would he take a significant pay cut to come back? And there's a guy where perhaps the whole TAM money thing may, be the determining factor on whether or not he's back.
Yeah, I mean, if you can spread out the money, if you're not, remember TAM's ceiling currently $1.5 million. You'd have to get him under the 1.5, which we talked about whenever they were deciding whether to keep Giovanni Dos Santos and how that might work. So Alessandrini could drop down to, if you paid him $1 million, if you gave him Shelvik money, which we both agree Jorgen Shelvik ain't coming back, that ain't happening. So Jorgen Shelvik's going to open up $1 million. Maybe you could move Roman Alessandrini down to the Shelvik's hole, for $1 million. Does Roman Alessandrini give you enough? He didn't this season. He didn't give you enough this season, but if he's healthy, and then again, do you want to bet $1 million, Kevin? Are you ready to bet $1 million, Kevin, that Roman Alessandrini can stay healthy for next season?
I mean, I think I would if I'm the Galaxy, because he would be very valuable in that system. The question is, that's essentially a 50% pay cut. Does Roman take that? I think he does, because he wants to be here, and frankly, where else is he going to go? He's on the wrong side of 30. He's got that injury history. He's not going back to France. So where does he wind up playing? I mean, this has got to be better than, going and playing in the Middle East somewhere. He's not going to go to China. This is kind of like either he takes the pay cut or he retires, and I think the team probably knows that.
Yeah, it feels that way. We already talked about Jorgen Shelvik, who made $1 million. He seems gone. Diego Polenta, that's probably, I imagine that he comes back. That doesn't seem like that's a stretch for him to come back. And it's more than likely he has at least a 1+1 contract, 1 year plus one option at the very least. Maximum it's probably 2 years plus an option. So Diego Polenta seems likely. Yeah.
Here's one thing to look at when you're looking at these guys. Shelvik didn't even dress the last couple of games.
Yep.
There are two classes of players now. There are the players that Guillermo and Dennis brought in. We're talking about Polenta, Gonzalez. I think those guys all come back. I thought Gonzalez actually had a terrible year, and I think if you look at the games he started in the record of the team, I think that kind of proves that he had a bad year. And looking at the replays of 3 of the 5 goals in the LAFC game, he was right in the middle of plays not being made. So I don't think he had that good a year, but I do think but he's a World Cup player, and I think Dennis and Guillermo believe in him. They talked about him a lot before they brought him in. Same with Polenta. So I think those two guys are definitely back, even if you look at them and say, hey, maybe they didn't live up to billing. And then I think Shelvik, and we've talked probably Romney too, those guys are out. Those are guys that the new regime inherited, and they're not wedded to those guys. A guy that kind of falls in between, because we're talking about defenders now. What about what about Felcher?
Yeah.
He was a guy that proved valuable at times, but also struggled at times. I could see that one going either way. He does provide some value in the kind of system that Guillermo wants to play. He is an attacking outside back, a winger. But did he show enough to come back?
And that's an interesting one, too, because if you think about it, they denied his option last year in the offseason and then signed him to a lower contract, right? So this is a guy who they decided they could have gotten rid of, and we imagine that Dennis was still pulling the strings at that time, even though it was well before his announcement. We know that Dennis was working in that front office, so Dennis decided that he was worth keeping, at least last year, that went into this season. So he is, as you said, sort of in between. He feels like he falls in between those two. The Galaxy's biggest struggles are probably at outside back, so do you wipe the slate clean? Is Felcher a depth one? He is a question mark. I don't think you can pin it either way. I wouldn't be surprised if the Galaxy wrote him off, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Galaxy brought him back. Either of those seem perfectly capable.
They do have options at that position. Araujo and Didi Traore could play that position. Then it may not feel like either one of them are completely ready, and so they keep Rolf for insurance reasons. And he doesn't make a ton of money. He's going to probably be asked to take a slight pay cut again and wind up right around $200,000, which is not all that much. He might be worth bringing back just for numbers, but you're right. I mean, he's a guy that's on the bubble, and that whole idea of who did we bring in and who did we inherit, I think that's going to play very heavily into who comes back and who doesn't.
Well, and then it leads right back into the salary cap issue. How do you know how much you can pay these guys if you don't know what a salary cap is? All this stuff is being sort of negotiated in the blind, which is why I would expect that this is a slow developing year in terms of, re-signing guys and negotiations and all sorts of things, because it just doesn't seem like the Galaxy will be able to have that information in hand early. Maybe the Union and MLS get this figured out well beforehand, Kevin, which neither of us think is a possibility right now. But maybe, they've been having talks enough that it all makes sense. Some other guys that also fall into sort of question marks, you have to look at the loan guys as well. Fabio Alvarez, Uriel Antuna, both guys on loan. We talked about Antuna and Dennis Closa mentioning, I think, to Fox Deportes, basically saying that we have an option on Uriel. If anybody else wants him, we could then decide that we want him. And if that's the case, then, we would have to pay for him. Is that a guy? I'm telling you right now, I would not buy Uriel Antuna. I like the kid. He's 22, 23 years old. So he's in a sweet spot, and you would hope that he continues. And with his success on the international stage, I think that has driven the price up for him. But having said all that, I don't know that Uriel Antuna is a difference maker for you. He certainly started a lot of games. He showed he's young. He showed he has speed. All things that the Galaxy need. But is that enough to risk, a fairly sizable amount of money whenever you look at what it was involved sort of in the loan and everything else? Is that enough to do that again? And that's a big question mark in terms of what the Galaxy, because now you're talking about cash outlay too, Kev. If they have to pay for Uriel Antuna, they're buying him outright. That's a whole nother issue. If it's above a certain amount of money, you're talking about Uriel Antuna becoming designated player worthy or targeted allocation money worthy. So those are bigger numbers and bigger things to sort of swallow than just having a guy on a loan.
Well, I think the way that the Galaxy are probably going to look at it is without Zlatan, and I do believe he's gone, and we can talk about that a little bit, but under Guillermo, they're going to go to a 4-3-3. So in our back line, we would have Polenta and Gonzalez, Steris, and I'm just going to say Romney, maybe Felcher. Mm-hmm. Up front, who are you going to have? You're going to have Pavone for sure, and he'll probably play I guess he'd be a winger. But who are the other two guys you put up front? I mean, right now, I think I would probably put Fabio and Antuna, just because I don't know who else to put up there. And then Jonathan would be in the center of the midfield because he would play that sort of box-to-box role, I think. Mm-hmm. Who do you put on the wings? I mean, Alessandrini would certainly fit in real nice there. What happens to Sebastian Lletget? Do you bring Perry Kitchen back or Joe Corona and try to use Jonathan in a different place? Perry Kitchen looked like he was done until the last couple of games, and he played so well. The last thought you have of a guy, the last vision you have of him, the last snapshot, that tends to linger going into an offseason, and his last two games were very good. Is it enough to forget all the injuries and things that went before? And then he's a guy that has a high price tag, and I don't think he's going to be willing to negotiate it down substantially. So they're going to have to pay him if they want to bring him back.
I've always thought that Perry Kitchen would come back. I don't think he's going to come back at the same price that he's at, which is about $475,000. To me, that's a 250, 275 type of guy in my mind, and that's a significant pay cut. You might be right. He may not be willing. I don't know that anybody's going to be willing to take any pay cuts right now. And again, without knowing what the salary cap is and knowing what the available pool of money is, I don't know how any of this stuff gets done. It hurts my head.
I just think Roman and Felcher, because I just don't see them having a whole lot of options. I could be wrong. I mean, maybe that the entire French league is talking to Roman. They all want him to come back. But given what he made this year, I mean, the Galaxy can't embarrass the guy. They can't say come back for 200,000 for 1/10 of what you got. I think they could have gone to $1 million. Is that too much? Given the salary cap, maybe. But again, you're not going to embarrass a guy that you're going to be counting on. And I just think that he's motivated. And I just don't see. I don't know what Perry's options would be. Right. It could be that he goes somewhere else and starts over.
He could go to Miami. He could go to Miami. He could go to Nashville. I mean, you're looking at
Kurt Schmidt is in Miami, and I would not be surprised if a number of Galaxy players at least talk to Miami, because Kurt knows these guys, and he's one of the people in Miami that's in charge of putting this team together. He knows what's here. The talented players, I think he's going to take a look at.
I want to talk about a guy who I think was 1,000% underutilized, and I don't remember if I talked about it on Friday. Certainly looking at the vast majority of this year, a guy who deserved a lot more minutes and didn't get him was Chris Pontius. He went through some injuries, did some things, but I'll be honest with you. If you go back and look, I feel like if I'm in charge of the game last Thursday night, I figure out a way to get Chris Pontius on the field. This is a guy who's scored big goals in Major League Soccer, who's scored big goals for the LA Galaxy, who has done stuff over and over again. He was underutilized this year, and I'm not sure why. With Ramon Alessandrini out, the easy answer was for Chris Pontius to be the backup to Uriel Antuna and to be a change from Uriel Antuna as well. Antuna has the speed, but Pontius has the physical ability, and he knows how to score goals. This is a guy who, if I'm the LA Galaxy, I sit there and go, we want you back next year, and we're going to use you, and you're going to be an offensive sub, and we're going to bring you on, especially, Kevin, if you're talking about guys who... if in a 4-3-3, you need the outside wings. You need an outside wing up top. You need an outside midfielder up top. An outside midfielder as well. So this is a guy like Chris Pontius who would come in and provide you some of that stuff in those offensive situations. But I don't know what's next for Chris Pontius. If you think about it, a guy who I think is from Yorba Linda, California here in the Southland, he is home right now. Does he want to move at his age and do something else? And
he's 30. He's going to be 33 next season.
He's going to be, and by the way, I think he has a season of substitute appearances, in still ready for him. Maybe not. Maybe he wants to go somewhere else. Maybe he wants to call it a career as well. You're talking about a guy who's at the end. So all of these things sort of have to be discussed for Chris Pontius, but I think Guillermo didn't get it right. I think that Dennis and Guillermo missed this one on not utilizing Chris Pontius as much as they probably should have.
Well, I really believe this, and I've already talked about it. I probably talked about it too much, but I really do think that there is a prejudice, and it's understandable. The guys that they brought in, they brought them in with visions and hopes and an idea of how to utilize them, and those guys are going to get every extra opportunity. And Pontius was a guy they inherited, and they maybe not sure what to do with him, didn't trust him. He's not one of their guys, quote unquote. I do agree with you that he deserves a chance to be brought back, but I think Guillermo talked about this when they had to play that tournament with the Mexican teams, where that was a tournament that Guillermo wasn't aware that was going to exist when he put his roster together. And he talked about how doing it next year, meaning 2020, he was going to do it a little bit differently. They do have MLS. They're going to have the Leagues Cup. They're going to have a U.S. Open Cup. I think Guillermo is going to be a little bit smarter about putting together a deeper roster, and I think that's going to help people like Pontius, maybe Joe Corona, people that maybe they're not looking, maybe they don't fit into their first choice 4-3-3, but they're solid guys, they're good character guys, they're good locker room guys, they're veterans. You're absolutely right about Pontius. Coming into a playoff game like that was not going to be flustered. Those are guys that I think could be valuable to give the team depth, that help out on the MLS level, but primarily to be the guys that carry the team in these other tournaments.
You go down, and now you start getting into some of the other names. We talked about Sebastian Lletget. I expect him to be back next year. I don't think the Galaxy are going to send him off somewhere. I think that he was good down the stretch. I think if they find the right place for him, that Sebastian Lletget could be, as dangerous as I think we've all seen him be at times. I wonder if this year helped him get back on track, though, Kev. I wonder if this was the year that people were expecting from him after the injuries last year, after everything that sort of, didn't really take off for him the way that I think we were all expecting it to. Did this year, in your mind, get Sebastian Lletget back on track?
I'm just not sure that he has a position. He played pretty well in the central midfield there at the end when they decided that was his home. But they played a different type of formation. If they go to the 4-3-3, does he become a winger up on the front line, on the forward line? Where does he play in midfield? He's not going to play in the center because I think that's where Jonah would play.
Yep.
So I don't know that. I think that's one of the things they'd have to find a position for him. Perhaps up front on the forward line on one of the wings might be the place where he goes.
Domestic talent with Sebastian Lletget, the same as Joe Corona. Domestic talent, in my mind, you don't get rid of those guys. You make it work. I think Seba could play out on the right-hand side. I think he could play on the left-hand side. So I think he's played in those winger positions before. Bruce Arena played him in those positions. So he could, in that midfield, be one of those guys. Fabio Alvarez is another one that we've sort of kicked around whether or not. He seems like a guy who would come back, not just because the LA Galaxy and Guillermo Barros-Schelotto seem to like him, but also for the fact that he's great. He's like best friends with Christian Pavone, and if you're trying to keep Pavone happy and you're trying to keep everything going, what does Fabio Alvarez, really cost you in the long term? $586,250 this season, which seems maybe like he's a little overpaid. But how much of that is loan and everything else? So bringing him back might be an important thing. But you get into like the Tomas Hilliard Arces, Julian Araujo, where he seems to be future-proofed. Efrain Alvarez, who you say, well, of course they bring him back. Well, from the rumors we've been hearing, one, Europe seems to be calling for him. And two, it sounds like his contract may be up. So as a homegrown player, his contract doesn't hit the salary cap, which is good. So the LA Galaxy can afford to splash cash on him to keep him. But is that best for what's the development of Efrain Alvarez? And with Dennis DeClosa being all about development and all about understanding, what's best for the player and what's best for the team, is Efrain Alvarez the future of this LA Galaxy team? But
remember, Dennis brought him into the Mexican program. I was one of the people that brought him in. He has a long history with him and believes in him. There were times, I went back and forth on him all year. There were times when he seemed to be just a brilliant talent, and then other times when he seemed to be very lackadaisical. He didn't seem like he was really applying himself. So I don't know if there are problems there. Dennis knows him better than anybody. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with him, because if Dennis isn't motivated to bring him back, that should tell whatever team he's going to that they have some issues, because there's no one that's been in his corner more than Dennis. What about goalkeeper? What do you do with Bingham? I mean, he had a good year, a great year at times. He seemed to play very well. He seemed to struggle at times. He had faced a ton of shots, faced the most shots on goal in the league and made the most saves. But he seems shell-shocked at times too.
Yeah, I think shell-shocked from all the shots.
Yes.
Yeah, $375,000 for David Bingham. An average goalkeeper salary for a starting goalkeeper, maybe a little bit on the high side. Are you going to be able to go out, and as so many people have hinted at, or go out and get an international goalkeeper? Again, with the number of international slots that are out there, I still think the Galaxy team will struggle to get all of them underneath, sort of their international cap and what they'll do with them. So in my mind, David Bingham has been a perfectly acceptable goalkeeper in Major League Soccer. He probably won you some games. He probably lost you some games. And all in all, I think he's a slightly above average goalkeeper. I don't know that means you go out and try to find somebody else, though, Kevin, because sometimes I think that anybody else you're bringing in could be worse. You're going to have to know that you for sure have somebody better than David Bingham if you go out and bring anybody else in.
Yeah, I think using an international slot on a goalkeeper, that just is not the way MLS has worked. Goalkeepers have almost always been American. Goalkeepers and defenders have been Americans. They've been domestic players, and then the attackers have been the foreign players that you spend a lot of money on. But a couple of players that we haven't talked about, you mentioned Juninho. I don't think there's any question that he does not come back. He's gone. Another guy, Servando Carrasco, for what they paid him, somewhere around $65,000, $70,000, it was very useful. He was a good practice player, very good clubhouse guy. He played some very, very important minutes, didn't get a lot of starts. there's a lot of reasons why you might want to bring him back, especially at that price. But I think, again, at that price, with his wife, Alex Morgan, expecting a baby in April, I think Servando probably becomes a little more valuable to the family as a Mr. Mom raising the baby. I'm not sure that the Galaxy are going to be able to talk him into coming back. He had told me earlier in the year that he was thinking that this might be his last year for family reasons as well. So especially if Alex is going to go back and play in Orlando, Servando's not going to want to have the family be bi-coastal again with a baby. So I think Servando Carrasco's probably gone.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, listen, we've talked about most of the people. Emil Cuellar, we're starting getting down to the guys who really flip a coin. They stay, they go. It doesn't really matter all that much, and they don't cost all that much money. Christian Pavón coming back. Did the Galaxy option the buy right away? I wouldn't. You have him on loan, and it seems likely that you have the option to use that loan, unless all of a sudden Boca gets a gigantic offer for him and you need to go in and make that option, which, by the way, I know it's been reported as being $20 million, Kevin, but you have reported that it's much less than that according to Dennis Teclosa, right?
Yeah, when I brought that figure up to Dennis, he just burst out laughing. And I'm like, what? Is it even close? He goes, it's not anywhere close to that.
Okay, so just to put it in frame of mind, so if the Galaxy have to go out and spend some money on Christian Pavón, they can do that, and they can make him a designated player, and he becomes a designated player anyway. The big question mark, I guess, certainly the back and forth of Roman Alessandrini is interesting, but it's a Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Kevin. I mean, where do we... I said I think he's 50-50. I don't think he knows the answer yet, or maybe he does know the answer and he's just not sharing. Where do you think Zlatan Ibrahimovic is for this LA Galaxy team?
I think he's gone, and there's a number of reasons that lead me to think that. One, I know the gesture that he made coming off the field at LAFC had been interpreted and misinterpreted and interpreted different ways. Some people said he was laughing as he grabbed at his crotch. Maybe he was, and maybe he meant it in a lighthearted thing. It's really hard to tell with Zlatan, but I don't think you make that gesture unless you've already decided that the door is closed behind you. Whether you're kidding or not, I don't think you make that kind of gesture on national television, and surely he knew he was on national television. So I think he had made up his mind before that. His comments about the league and about the style of play and the referees and VAR, it got more and more pointed as the year went along. At the end of the season, he really couldn't even say a kind word about MLS. I think he was disappointed at the level, or surprised at the level of competition. I think he did find it at times to be a little bit too easy. And by the way, I think he was the most dominant player in league history when he wanted to win a game. And I know he didn't win every game he played, but when he applied himself and wanted to win and wanted to play, you couldn't stop him. But I just think that he's worn out his welcome. I've heard a lot of talk about he is not the most popular player in the clubhouse, that there are some guys that he rode all season long, and there will not be a tear shed if Zlatan decides to clean out his locker and move on. But man, he's meant a lot to the league. He's brought a lot of attention to the league. He brought a lot of fun to the league. He's kind of, in a lot of ways, he was like Robbie Keane, and very intense, very driven, selfish, if you want to call it that. Maybe confidence a better word. But where Robbie Keane was hyper serious all the time, Zlatan was a breath of fresh air. Sure, a lot of the stuff he said was over the top, but he meant it that way, and he was just a lot of fun. So he may not have been the most popular guy in the dressing room, but I think he did an awful lot for the league to bring attention and a little bit of star power, a little bit of fun back to soccer.
If that's the case, if Zlatan's gone, Galaxy have a huge task at hand in replacing, 30 goals. I'm not saying you have to get 30 goals from one guy. That's asking a lot, but you need to get, two guys who are going to score you 15 goals. If Pavón ends up being a designated player, which he's going to be if he stays with the LA Galaxy next year, which we're anticipating he will. So when he comes back, he's a designated player. The only one you have locked in is Jonathan Dos Santos, right? So you have Jonathan Dos Santos and Christian Pavón. Those are the two that are locked in. Roman Alessandrini, we talked about not being a designated player next year if he stays with the LA Galaxy. So, that space is open. So the Galaxy will have an open designated player space. They have Mesut Ozil rumors right now, possibly to the LA Galaxy. Actually, I was talking with Sophie Nicolau, of course, on the show on occasion, and she was texting me. She's like, "Did you hear about these rumors for Ozil to the LA Galaxy?" And I go, "I haven't heard anything, but it doesn't surprise me if there's something to that."
No, I don't think aging European players. That's not the way this new Galaxy front office is going.
I disagree. I disagree 100%. They need somebody who's going to fill seats, Kevin. They absolutely, and I know people want to argue against this, but when Zlatan Ibrahimovic leaves, you need somebody who's going to fill seats. You need somebody who's going to score goals and fill seats. Tell me some abstract South American player that I don't know is going to come in and score a ton of goals for the LA Galaxy and fill seats.
I think Atlanta United has filled a lot of seats without an aging European player.
Congratulations. Welcome to Georgia. There's not much to do there. Go watch a soccer game. Sounds like fun.
Wait a minute. They got the Falcons. They had the Braves in the playoffs.
Trust me. The perception in Los Angeles is so much different than it is in Atlanta of what you need to do. Los Angeles is a winning city.
How LAFC sold out every game they've ever played without an aging European superstar?
They have Carlos Vela, though.
He came when he was 28. That's not it.
That's an aging. I'm sorry. That is an aging European player. That is peak past. All right, peak at 25 to 27.
Ozil needs a walker.
Ozil might need a walker. Absolutely. And Zlatan needed a walker. I'm not saying you have to get somebody who is 38 years old, and I'm not saying you need, but I mean, if you're going to tell me somebody in the 29, 30, 31, 32 range, I'm going to tell you absolutely.
Okay, well, here's why you're wrong. I'm not even going to say I think you're wrong. Here's why you're wrong.
Yes.
Ozil doesn't do that because he is a big name among soccer players, but the kind of casual fan you want to draw, I don't think is going to come out to see at Ozil. That's one. Two, you don't get rid of Zlatan and his 30 goals, and I agree with you. You don't replace those 30 goals. No one's going to score 30 goals. It's only been done 3 times in the history of the league.
Right.
And he did it at 38 years old. So 37, 38. So you're not going to replace the 30 goals. But one of the reasons that the Galaxy, I think, would be motivated to see him go is because they want to play this different style, the one that Guillermo had played to great success in Argentina, and I think he wants to play that way. I don't see Ozil being able to further that.
Might not be able to.
I don't see him helping Guillermo make that transition. And so now you bring him in for a couple of years, you delay the remaking of the Galaxy for another couple of years. The Galaxy are going to change the style of play, and that's why they're getting rid of Zlatan. I don't think Ozil helps that. And one thing, when you talk about not replacing the 30 goals, they're not going to do it with one guy. But when you look at what Zlatan was all about, the number of shots on goal he had, the next 5 players on the Galaxy roster with the shots on goal, they didn't add up to as many as Zlatan took. He had more than half the team's goals. So that's a lot to replace. But I think when you change the style of play, I think there's a chance the Galaxy are going to be maybe even more dangerous offensively. My gut feeling is that the Galaxy are going to take a step back next year. I think bringing in this new style of play, it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to. I don't know if the Galaxy have quite the season next year they had this season, but I think it's the right move going forward, and I don't think Mesut Ozil is going to help that.
Okay, set Ozil aside. If the Galaxy take a step backwards next year, Guillermo won't last the end of the season. All right, you cannot have another step backwards. There cannot be a step backwards for next year. Despite putting in the new system, if they're going to play a 4-3-3, which they had a lot of segments of during this season. So I think that they could have a lot of luck in terms of understanding the system and understanding the personnel. I also don't think that they're going to replace, so many, and I talked about this, I think, on Friday. I don't think you can just sit here and gut this team like everybody wants everything to be gutted. I think the bones have to stay in place. You have to keep guys like Joe Corona. You have to keep guys like Jonathan Dos Santos, like Sebastian Lletget, like, Christian Pavone is going to come back. Flavio Alvarez probably seems like he's a bones guy where you're going to keep these bones together. You may replace some pieces on the edges, but you cannot go through and wholesale change the way that I think everybody wants an entirely new defense. Don't have an entirely new defense. That's why Dan Stairs is probably going to get paid. That's why Pipo Gonzalez is probably back. That's why Diego Polenta is back. And then maybe you go out and get 1 or 2 more defenders to come in and fill in around those guys. Thinking that this is any sort of a rebuild, and people should stop using that because it cannot be a rebuild. If the Galaxy rebuild, Guillermo Barros-Schelotto won't survive it, and Dennis Declosa won't survive it. I don't care if they have a roadmap that goes for the next 5 years. You just can't do that in Los Angeles. It cannot happen in Los Angeles right now, especially with the climate, especially with the noisy neighbors across the way.
I think a guy that would be a better signing for what they want to do, and if you're talking about if you need to sign a player to fill seats, Man, what about Javier Hernandez? What about Chicharito?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a long rumor in terms of getting him to the L.A. area for a while, obviously, because of the Mexican fan interest in him, and just Los Angeles as a whole, getting behind some of the Mexican players with Oriol Antuna and Jonathan Dos Santos and Carlos Vela. It would be a good addition, and it would be fun to see. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a guy who they could possibly bring in, and who could possibly give you some of the goals that you need.
And would fill seats, and I think he might be a little bit more motivated. I know you've mentioned that rumor's been around forever, and it has been, but the change now is he appears to have fallen out of favor with the new brain trust that the Mexican national team does not appear to be a guy who has a long-term future, be completely out of the picture by the next World Cup. So at some point, Chicharito's going to have to make the decision, look, I need to build for the future. I need to come to LA and start the marketing machine and get all that going and set myself up for when it's over. If he's out of the national team picture, why stay over there, anonymous player in Spain? Why not come back over here and start to get that attention and some of the big bucks that everyone's always said that he's going to get if he comes here?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think the magnitude of the replacement for Zlatan Ibrahimovic is going to be important. There was no replacing David Beckham. You can't replace David Beckham. There was no replacing Robbie Keane just in terms of what he was able to do with his time with the LA Galaxy, his success with the LA Galaxy, and the fact that, yeah, he put butts in seats along with Landon Donovan, but that was more of a collective thing. Really, you're looking at Zlatan Ibrahimovic and you're looking at David Beckham as two guys who you can't replace, but you have to follow up afterwards. You have to do something that attempts to fill those seats afterwards, and it's going to come from winning, and it's going to come from having those names and those important stars there. So Guillermo and Dennis have a very tall order to even begin to approach if Zlatan Ibrahimovic isn't going to stay with the LA Galaxy, and hopefully, if that is the case, that he is gone as soon as, that he's already told them what their plans are, because the Galaxy need to start planning for what this 2020 team is going to be, and they can't do it if they don't know what Zlatan is, because we talk about, the salary cap and things you don't know. Well, there's one thing you don't need to worry about, is that basically the designated player spots, I would imagine, will stay the same, and so if that's the case, they'll be able to go out and find their next designated player and bring them in to this team. You don't have to wait for, the salary cap. They're outside the salary cap. It doesn't matter. So finding the next designated player if Zlatan is gone, which, again, I tend to lean in that direction as well at 50-50, but I'm leaning in terms of he's gone. If he's gone, then this is one of those areas that you have to spend a lot of time shopping and investigating and going after and understanding who's going to be available in this winter transfer window, basically for the rest of the world.
I think that Galaxy and Zlatan both already know. I think they've already told each other. I think that's done. I think Zlatan is gone, and I think Dennis knows that. Gives him $7.2 million to spend. I think probably spent some of that on trying to shore up that defense. It's obvious that's a position of need, and it's also obvious that is a position that is very different under the kind of formation they're going to want to play going forward, the kind of system. It becomes a very specialized position. So I think they'll use some of the money there. Another thing just to continue this Chicharito ball rolling, because everyone's always so interested in this, Dennis has a long history with Chicharito from the Mexican national team. He may be the one guy. We know that there's been some romances with teams in MLS, and they never really got very far. Maybe this is the one thing that could get that over the finish line. The idea that Dennis knows how to talk to him, knows what buttons to push, knows what Javier wants in his future, and maybe he'll be able to make that offer in Los Angeles.
It's going to be an interesting time. The LA Galaxy in their postseason mode now, and again, we're told exit interviews should take place sometime next week, I believe is what everything was finally decided on, although that's still a little fluid as we're trying to figure out exactly when that happens. So one of the things, I don't know if I told the story on Friday's game, but I thought about it again this morning, is that I was standing in the tunnel at Bank of California Stadium. I was there next to Sophie as this giant mob surrounded where Zlatan Ibrahimovic would eventually talk, but was not talking at currently. So Sophie and I were sort of standing back, Kevin, and you could see all the Galaxy players coming off the field, and you could see them going to the locker room, and you could see them gutted, and just, some had tears in their eyes. You could just tell that, they had given everything that they could probably give on that night. That wasn't about an effort. That was about, just not winning the game on that particular one. But I mentioned to Sophie, and I said, there are 23 other teams that this is going to happen to this year in Major League Soccer. And next year, whenever there's 26 teams, there's going to be 25 teams that go through this every year. So it's a shared experience basically across the entire league. There's only one team every year that ends the season happy. And that just wasn't the LA Galaxy this year, and it hasn't been in the past couple of years. But they have a chance to take another step forward, I think, and trying to get to that step forward with the CBA not being finalized, not understanding what you're working with, and understanding that there are going to be players that leave that you're going to have to replace. They're going to be players who you can't come to an agreement with on contracts. There's going to be so much of this that they're going to have to figure out with sort of unknown rules and limitations on and everything like that, Kevin, that this offseason is going to be an extremely difficult one for the LA Galaxy front office.
But you're right. I mean, the way you started the program, let's not get too down. I mean, the Galaxy did do better this year than last year, both in terms of the standings and in passing the eyeball test. They did make the playoffs. Guillermo's goal at the start of the season. They won a playoff game. That was kind of icing on the cake. And I think Guillermo's post-game comments after the LAFC game kind of gave the indication that he was happy with what the team had done. I think Dennis and Guillermo and the coaching staff, they made some strides. They figured some things out. They know a little bit better about what they want to do going forward. So I think this was did they win the MLS Cup? No. Did they get to the conference final? No. But I think it was a good year. Baby steps maybe,
yes,
but steps forward, certainly. In the last 2 years, I think have been steps backwards. So steps forward. One more Chicharito note. He's just so you know, Sevilla's played 10 games this year. He's played in 5. He's only started 3, and he just scored his first goal. That sounds like a guy who's probably looking for greener pastures.
It very well could be. Don't know. It'll be interesting to sort of see how that comes up. And listen, we're going to start getting rumors about a whole bunch of things.
Let's start some.
But yeah, so I think we just did. I think you did. You talked about Chicharito, and now everybody's going to be like, Chicharito's coming to the LA Galaxy. It'll probably get translated in Swedish because we talked about Zlatan, and now you're going to be translated to say that.
What other big names can we talk about?
That Chicharito, David Beckham comes out of retirement, and Christian Pulisic definitely to the LA Galaxy, right? That one's going to happen.
Yeah, Messi likes LA.
Messi likes
coming.
Cristiano Ronaldo, of course, the one that won't die and hasn't, and was a rumor whenever I started covering the team in 2009. So yeah, all that fun stuff. I'm sure.
I really do. I honestly do believe at some point he winds up playing for Beckham in Miami.
That wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Let's see if just some rumblings that we're hearing. I'm hearing that there's a possibility of a retirement on the LA Galaxy, a possibility of some other players not coming back and already having that decision being made. So as soon as we get more information on that, I will be able to. But a little teaser,
that's it. You're
right?
going to say a rumor of people retiring, and then you're not going to tell us who?
Yep, that's what I do.
Wow.
I just tease. I tease and I tease. If I had the solid information, I would say it. But right now, you have to wait for it to play out, Kevin. Come on, reporter Kevin. You know how this goes.
Well, I think I don't know.
Yeah,
Pontius might be one.
No,
Servando I think is retiring.
I think Servando might go.
Juninho's retiring.
See,
there they are. We got them all.
We got them all. That was it. Good job. Way to go.
By the way, there are no players. Juninho played on the 2014 team, but no player that's been continuously with the Galaxy since the last MLS Cup. Juninho is the only one, and he left and came back. 5 years, just totally, the team's totally redone.
Well, think about that though. In 5 years, and how old players are, and what happens in 5 years on a team, and what happens in Major League Soccer that sort of has this instability built in. I bet a bunch of teams change over 5 years. You look at 5 years, ago in I was going to say Atlanta. They weren't around for 5 years. In Seattle, just how Seattle's changed in 5 years. So yeah, there's going to be some players who carry you for a very long way, but in 5 years, you should see, I would guess, almost a majority of the roster gets turned.
By the way, you speak of Seattle. They've been in the playoffs 11 consecutive seasons. They've been in the playoffs every year. They've been a team.
In Major League Soccer, yep.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And that consistency, I mean, that's one thing the Galaxy are lacking. They did get to the playoffs this year without any of the guys that took them to the last MLS Cup. It is a different beast now. Getting to the playoffs, it is a different tournament. You have 34 games during the regular season. There's a rhythm to it. You get to the playoffs. Now especially, it's one and done. The Galaxy did not have a ton of players on this team with MLS playoff experience. So that's another good thing that came out of this season is they got that taste of that. Teams like Toronto and Seattle that are there every year, those guys are experienced. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about there's no one from this team 5 years ago. When you lose that experience of what it means to go to the postseason, that's kind of when your elder statesmen step up to become leaders. And the Galaxy don't have that because they don't have a roster of guys with playoff experience. They do now. All the starters here, now they have 2 games of playoff experience under their belt, the guys that come back. Of the last playoff team in 2016, there were only 3 players on the Galaxy roster that were on that 2016 team or that played in that playoff game in Colorado, Romney, Steris, and Sebastian Lletget. So that's another thing the Galaxy got out of this season is they got that playoff experience. It's definitely going to help them next year.
We'll see how they do. Let's see. As it goes for the show, we are now into postseason mode. Postseason mode means that we have shows whenever we have information and stuff to share with you. And if
I guess.
Yeah, I was going to.
In my case,
sometimes nothing. That means that we might not have a show next Monday. It just sort of depends on how it goes. I'll tell you for sure, we're not going to have a show on Thursday. It's Halloween, and I don't expect there to be a ton of developments. If there's developments, we will have shows. If not, we won't. So that's sort of in the space that we're in right now. I would imagine, and what usually happens in the offseason, Kevin, is you and I get together about once a week in order to do most of this stuff. So there's still usually enough information to do that. I don't think there's going to be a ton of information until after MLS Cup, whenever Galaxy start announcing contracts they've kept, contracts they've gotten rid of, a whole bunch of different things like that. And then we start moving into that off season, and then eventually, Josh has a baby, so we have that as well. So there's a bunch of stuff that we'll contend with, but just sort of hang in there. There's no real set schedule from right now through sort of the off season, and as we get closer to the beginning of soccer, usually that ramps up again as well.
Speaking of the baby, your
Yes.
baby could hang out with Servano Carrasco's baby because they're going to be about the same age.
There you go. They're having a little girl, right? So see,
Yes.
that's probably my son's probably going to marry, the Miss
would be
Carrasco,
awesome.
Miss Carrasco over there. So
Hey, so what are you going to be for Halloween?
I am going to be a dad. I think. I think that's all I'm going to do. My wife has family coming into town, and so they're going to come trick or treating. So I imagine that I'll be chaperoning around the neighborhood.
You know what I'm
going
going to be?
What are you going to be?
Panda.
A panda. I should have seen that one coming. That was my bad, everybody. That was my bad. Hold on, wait a minute.
Panda and Pato in the morning.
There you go. Do you need me to get that on your phone so you can walk around as a panda and never to ask you what you are?
That would be cool.
That would be perfect. All right. Anything else, Kev? You good?
No, we got to go before my microphone goes out again.
Yeah, let's hurry up.
This has been a show of technical difficulties. Those people out there in Podland do not understand what we had to go through to get this show recorded.
Oh, I doubt I'll be able to stitch them all together perfectly. I'm sure somebody paying attention will catch it. Not the people who listen at 1.5 times speed, by the way. Those ones will probably miss it. But
no, they can't do that.
Yeah,
this is something to be enjoyed, like fine wine. Let it linger.
Don't give me that Netflix argue. I'm not gonna have it right now. All right.
Slow it down. Make
yeah.
it last longer.
Yeah, let's see if that works. All right. If you're looking for Mr. Kevin, oh man, and then he hits the wrong button. Is this like the perfect sort of like just whatever? If you want to find Kevin Baxter, head on over to Twitter at KBaxter11. I'm pretty sure that's where you find him. And if not, I don't really care anymore. It's been one of those shows.
We'll get better at this when we do 700 shows.
That's right. We'll keep going. Head on over to LATimes.com where you can find all of his writing covering soccer in the Southland and U.S. men's national team, U.S. women's national team, all that fun stuff. If it's soccer, Kevin's probably writing an article about it, so make sure you find it at LATimes.com. If you're looking for me on Twitter at JGuesman, JGUESMAN, and of course at Galaxy Podcast, and head on over to cornerofthegalaxy.com. We still have articles, we still have podcasts, we still have videos, we have all that fun stuff right there, cornerofthegalaxy.com. All right, for the Panda, Mr. Kevin Baxter, I'm Pato Josh Guesman, and you've been listening to Corner of the Galaxy from the Box on cornerofthegalaxy.com. Have a great one, everybody.
You've been listening to the Corner of the Galaxy from the Box podcast on cornerofthegalaxy.com. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Galaxy Podcast. And be sure to check out and subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook by searching for Corner of the Galaxy. And for all of your independent LA Galaxy news, discussion, and entertainment, including this podcast, head on over to cornerofthegalaxy.com. Fans, thanks for listening. We ask that you be kind and courteous to your neighbors as you leave the podcast. We thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you again. Until then, I'm Michael Araujo, and on behalf of the entire Corner of the Galaxy crew, goodbye, everybody.